Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's joining us for this interview. For those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Ashley Day, and I'm the Development Director at Refugee Services of Texas. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Khawaja Azimuddin. Dr. Azimuddin is a gastro-intestinal surgeon in Houston. He specializes in minimally invasive and robotic surgery for colon cancer. As a child, he spent 2 years in a refugee civilian prisoner of war camp. After almost 50 years, he's finally telling his story and hopes to bring attention to the current refugee crisis. And Dr. Azimuddin's book is available as of today, is that correct?
That is correct, it just came out today.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're so excited. I pre-ordered, so I can't wait to receive it. You'll be seeing the link for the Boy Refugee in our chat, and we'll post it on our website, rstx.org as well. So I encourage you all to go out, order the book, but we are going to tell you a little bit about what to expect. So thank you for being here on behalf of RST and the Austin Refugee Roundtable. We appreciate you and the work that you're doing. Can you start by setting the scene for the part of the book that you're about to read? Tell us a little bit about this place and how old you were, who you were with, those kinds of things.
Well, this is 1971. I was 8 years old. The war between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh had just finished. And as a result of the war, myself and my family became refugees. So I'm here with my parents and my 2 siblings, my older brother and my sister, and we are now in the protective custody of the United Nations. UNHCR did a wonderful job and they took us. And now, since we were refugees, they were in the process of transferring us to Pakistan. Pakistan was almost 1,000 miles away, actually, and I'll elaborate on that in a little bit. But basically, the process was started to take us from that refugee camp almost 1,000 miles away to what was then called the West Pakistan. So we are here gathered with my family and the journey is about to start.
Perfect, thank you. And with that introduction, I'll let you go ahead and read a little bit from your book, and then we will jump into questions.
That's wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity. So this is chapter 7. The long journey begins. This is the start of our journey. As morning came, there was quite a bit of hustle and bustle in the Kilo camp. I saw a long line of Indian army trucks approaching our camp. An army officer spoke on a horn loudspeaker and instructed us to come out with our luggage. We were in an apartment complex. They had temporarily placed us for a few days. So we gathered our belongings and lined up next to the trucks. The smell of the diesel fumes from the big trucks was nauseating, but at least the heat from the engines provided us with some warm, welcome warmth in the cold December weather. Very systematically, the Red Cross started loading us into the trucks. No one knew where we were going, but we were glad to be going somewhere, maybe to our home in Pakistan. Our turn came late in the morning. My family took our belongings and climbed into the back of the big green military truck. We sat on the benches on either side, while some people sat on the truck bed. We rode in the truck for 2 hours until we reached the port of Narayanganj. We disembarked from the trucks and were instructed to walk over to the docks. It was very chaotic, and it seemed like thousands of people were coming from everyone all at once. There were lots and lots of people but no one was making eye contact, and everyone seemed to be in their own world like a bunch of scared zombies. We were all walking as fast as we could, and a few people stumbled and fell too. Some people were old and infirm. Some were young and energetic. There were a lot of women and children in the crowd. The refugees were carrying everything they possibly could bring with them. Some had suitcases or cane baskets. Others carried sacks, bags, buckets, cooking pots, and everything imaginable. Some had simply tied their belongings into a cloth bundle, which they carried on their backs. An old steamboat was waiting for us at the Narayanganj port. We all lined up in small groups, and the lengthy process of counting, registration, and recounting began. At last, the formalities were completed, and we boarded the paddle steamer in the late afternoon. It was a large flat-bottom boat with small compartments on both the upper and lower decks, and large open floor spaces with numerous long wood benches on the deck. Though the old rocket steamer had a capacity of around 600 or so passengers, nearly 1,000 refugees were crammed into the decks and cabins. By the time we got on the boat, most of the space was already occupied. My family found a covered area on the upper deck, under the smokestacks, and we huddled together. It was quite comforting to be close to my family, all 5 of us together. Just after sundown, the big paddle wheels of the steamboat started to turn. The steamer let out a bellowing horn and pulled away from the dock into the choppy waters. As the steamer started picking up speed, the wind took its cue and blew fiercely on our faces. It was very gusty, and sitting on the deck, we were completely exposed to the elements. Soon night fell, and we were sailing down the river Meghna. It was a stormy night. The steamer churned, listed, and groaned under the weight of its passengers. With every strong crosswind, the old steamer lurched dangerously. The moon was full, causing the tidal Meghna River to toss the steamboat up and down on the currents. No one could sleep that night, and we feared that the overburdened ship would sink. So this is the little sample from one of the chapters in the book. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that and giving us an introduction into your journey. I'd like to remind our audience members that you are welcome to ask questions while I'm asking questions. So please go ahead and type them in the chat, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. So thank you for that. To start out, at the end of your reading, you're on a boat. Without revealing too much, can you tell us a little of what comes next in the story? What can readers look forward to hearing about?
So the boat took us to a river port of Khulna, and from there we boarded a train. The train was actually, the windows were all barricaded and the doors were locked, and in the trains we were stuffed in like sardines, and then just transported almost about 600 miles on the train to a place called Roorkee, where we were put in these camps. So actually, this is before we are in the camp, and this train would now take us to the camp where we spend the next 2 years of our lives.
Can you educate our listeners and myself on the conflict that caused your family's displacement? Can you tell us more about who was under persecution, why, and what that outcome was?
Yes. So in the 60s and 50s and 60s, Pakistan was one country, but consisted of East and West Pakistan. So essentially, there were two different nations. Their culture was different, their language was different, and a lot of traditions and cultures were different. After a while, there was discord between the two different types of people, because they were really separated from many, they were almost separated from 1,000 miles and one country. So that's a very, very unusual situation in history, that you have one country that is actually two wings. North Korea, South Korea, you would think that they are together. Here, East and West Pakistan were separated about 1,000 miles from each other. That happened when the British left India. And unfortunately, the partition, there was, that's a different story when the British left India, but they left East and West Pakistan 1,000 miles apart, supposedly one country, but there was a lot of differences. And over a period of time, differences grew. The Bengalis did not want to live together with the West Pakistani people, and so on and so forth. And then some discord started, some rioting started, and ultimately it left us with a civil war. So my family was from West Pakistan, and we were non-Bengalis, so we became the unwanted people in Bangladesh. Now, unfortunate situation is that both sides had committed atrocities, and in a war, in a civil war or in a war situation, there is no winner. Every person loses, and that is what the situation was. That initially there was a lot of atrocities committed by the West Pakistani military, and then in retaliations, the Bengalis killed a lot of Biharis and West Pakistani people. So, a war is a no-win situation, unfortunately. And without going into too much of the politics, I would say that both sides suffered tremendously as a consequence of this event.
So you spent some time in the camp that you referred to in your reading, and after your release from the camp, you settled in Pakistan. Can you tell us about your release and about your resettlement and your first months and years there?
So a large portion of the book is dedicated to our 2 years in the internment camp. And once we were released, of course, we were excited beyond belief. And we were once again transported in a train and crossed the border between India and Pakistan on October 29th, 1973. At that time, the government at that time gave us tickets to go to our final destination. And that really was the only support we got from the government at that time. So my family got into a train, and then we went all the way down to the southern port city of Karachi, where we had some relatives at that time who supported us.
So it sounds like family support was essential for you and your immediate family. Were there any other external supports to assist you with your resettlement?
So unfortunately, in those days, there was really no external support. The UNHCR and Red Cross helped us while we were in Bangladesh, but in Pakistan, they did not have any jurisdiction. And at that time, the government did not have enough resources in Pakistan. And really, there were no organizations like the work you are doing with the Texas, with the Refugee Commission. And there were no other NGOs or government support at that time, unfortunately.
I'd like to jump forward a little bit. Later in your life, you ended up going to medical school in Pakistan. What prompted that decision, and what was your journey to and through medical school like?
So in Pakistan, the first few years were obviously very difficult for us and for me and for my family. But one thing my mother insisted, and my father also, that we must get education to the highest degree. My father had a disappointment in his life, and that he had wanted to be a physician, and he never could become a physician. So both my father and mother instilled in me the thought that I must study hard and become a doctor. So really, it was through their cajoling and through their, support and their guidance, they really kind of brainwashed me into becoming a doctor. And that's where I got into medical school.
It seemed like it turned out well, though.
Yeah, I'm glad they did.
Yeah. We have a couple questions from the audience. So we're going to go back a little bit. So when you were talking about the conflict and the civil war that was going on, you said that both sides suffered. Can you expand on your views of what was happening to both sides, really?
So when the Bengalis wanted independence, the West Pakistani government, of course, did not take it lightly. Of course, whenever there is such a thought of independence and the people who want independence are declared rebels or whatever you want to call them, or anarchists. At the same time, people who want independence, they are very, they call themselves the freedom fighters. So it's really a perspective of which party you come from. One's hero is one's villain. So unfortunately, that is history. So initially, Pakistani army tried to curb the uprising in Bangladesh, and they were very heavy-handed, and a lot of people were killed. I think you can look at the history books. Millions of people were displaced, became refugees even before the war. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. So that what happened before the war. So after the war, the tide turned 180 degrees, and the Bengali militias they started killing the Bihari people, and that continued on for a while as well. So unfortunately, in war, as I mentioned, every party suffers.
Yeah. So with the refugee crisis still very relevant today, and this is another audience question, but one that I have as well, what inspired you to write about your experience and why now?
So it was a very unique experience, and I always had wanted to write something about it. To the extent that even during my teenager years in Pakistan, I had jotted down some notes. And these notes came in very handy when I was writing the books. So I had always it was in the back of my mind that I wanted to do it. But recently I had become more and more aware of the refugee situation, unfortunately. Now we have more refugees than any other time, I would say, except for World War II. The situation has doubled in the last 10 years or so, the number of refugees. Today, there are upwards of 70 million refugees in the world. And unfortunately, there are still conflicts in the world that is causing these people to leave their homes and get displaced. So I thought maybe writing this book would bring some attention to this refugee cause. And that was one of the main reasons I decided to write the book now.
We're getting a lot of questions. There's a lot of interest in your story, and I'm so excited for that. In the interest of time, I won't be able to ask all of those questions, but I'd like to dig into some of the ones that maybe won't be answered in your actual book, so that we can go ahead and read what you write, but then we can expand a little bit here. We have a question about how did you deal with anxiety, anger, and depression in the camp, and how did your parents deal with it?
That's a very, very good question. I'll tell you, I was a kid when I entered the camp. I was 8 years old. And then when we left, I was 10 years old. As a kid, you get along and you just, really, it doesn't dawn upon you the gravity of the situation. So as a kid, you go happy-go-lucky and you get out, you play. That's what kids do. But the one thing I was secured and I did not suffer from a whole lot of anxiety was because my parents were there. My mother was the bedrock of the family. My father was a very strong man. and they were there for us. So being just close to the family and my brother and sister and my parents was really all that a kid like me needed at that time.
Yeah.
Of course, we had some nightmares of people, trying to hurt us and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, my parents were with me. And that was my source of consolation. That's true for any kid, I guess.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I cannot tell you, my parents are really praiseworthy and how they handled this situation. They did not let us suffer, and they did not let us, dwell too much in this. Their outlook was positive on the outside. I'm sure within themselves, they must have suffered a whole lot of agony, but they did not show much emotions. Their whole emphasis was our well-being, and they just kept telling us, even during the camp, my mother used to teach me maths and English and Urdu. So that was their emphasis. Inside, I'm sure there was a big storm raging in there, but they kept it to themselves. They protected us, and they just wanted to propel us in the right direction.
We have some questions about your writing process. One person would like to know if it's been difficult for you to share your story, both in terms of re-experiencing maybe traumas that have been buried, or and doing justice to the conflict, and also in terms of digging deep into memories when you were so young. So has that been a difficult process for you?
I think there are three questions here, and the last one I think I remember best. So of course I was very young at that time.
Yeah.
But some memories are ingrained. And I mentioned that when I was a teenager, I wrote quite a few pages, quite a few actually, with the help of my mother. Mm-hmm. Then my brother and sister and my relatives, they all helped me put the pieces together. Then I did a lot of research, and fortunately I was able to not only find some information on internet, but also connect with a large number of people who were in the camps, in other camps, and some people who were also in my camps. So in fact, that was a very interesting process. I traveled quite a bit during this process and went and met those people who were in my camp. And some of them were very old, in their 80s. I met a gentleman who was the cage commander of our camp, who was actually the civilian in charge of our camp. I went to a small village in Cobourg, Canada, all the way to meet him. And similarly, I interviewed and called and met a lot of people. So a lot of digging went in there. The second question, I think, was, how do you reconcile with the facts? And yes, it is an unfortunate part, and it was very hurtful when you start digging up the facts as to what happened and what transpired. And it left me with a very deep feeling that, humans can, on both sides, can be capable of doing something very good, but they can also be capable of doing something very bad. So that became a very, very important factor in my life, a guiding principle in my life, that, it's difficult to assign a blame to someone. And I saw in this story that there was blame to be put on both sides. And one of the sides was my own side. So who do you deny? And you just cannot turn a blind eye. You have to understand that, acts are committed, aggression and all that. And one has to live with it. So I think the first and foremost thing that comes out of this is forgiveness. Accept the way the world is, learn to live with everyone who is around you, and get on with your life. You cannot put too much blame on one group of people or one person. Such is life. We have to carry on. We have to keep living the life.
Right. There are so many other questions that I want to ask, and that I can see others want to ask as well. But in the interest of time, we only have another minute. how can we get involved with refugee issues, and how can individuals make an impact on these issues that you're talking about?
So one is advocacy. Unfortunately, these days there is a lot happening in America, and there is very strong sentiments against refugee rehabilitation. So I think advocacy, talking to your representative, talking to your elected leaders at whatever level, city, state, local government, federal level, it would be a very good idea if we can do that. Secondly, organizations like yourself, they have an advocacy branch. And not just that, you are doing a fantastic job of rehabilitating the refugees and providing them the support and logistics. So I think supporting organizations like yourself and many others who are on the field.
Thank you, Dr. Khawaja Azimuddin, and thank you to our listeners. If you're interested in reading the book, please visit his website, boyrefugee.com. The link to the book will also be on our website at rstx.org. And finally, I invite you to access our website to learn more about the upcoming Texas Day of Action and how you can get involved with refugee resettlement. Our final session is now with our CEO, Russell Smith, and Simone Flowers of IACT, and you can find the link in the chat. Thank you so much for being with us today.